Good evening, and welcome back to the Velvet Past. Tonight there is nothing you need to do, and nowhere you need to be. So find a comfortable place to rest. Let your head sink into the pillow. Let your arms grow heavy, and your breathing grow slow. Tonight we are going to travel a very long way, and a very long way back, to the sunlit shores and quiet islands of ancient Greece. We will follow its whole story, gently, from the very beginning to the very end, over thousands of years. And you do not need to remember any of it. You do not need to stay awake. Let the words wash over you like slow water and drift off whenever you like. I will keep going softly all through the night. Let us begin, as the Greeks themselves did, with the sea. Chapter 1. The Wine Dark Sea. Picture the Mediterranean, long ago, before there were any cities, before there were any names. A warm blue sea, scattered with hundreds of islands, some no bigger than a single hill, some large enough to hold mountains and forests and rivers. The water is calm tonight. It moves slowly, rising and falling, the way your own chest rises and falls as you breathe. Along the shores, there are pale beaches and grey rocks and silver-green olive trees leaning in the soft wind. The Greeks would come to call this the Wine Dark Sea, for the deep colour it turned in the evening light. And it was the sea, more than anything, that shaped them. Their land was rugged and dry, cut into pieces by mountains, so that no single valley could easily reach another by land. But the sea joined everything together. A boat could slip from island to island, from bay to bay, carrying grain and oil and wine and stories and songs. The Greeks became a people of the water, always within sight of the coast, always listening to the waves. Imagine standing on one of those early shores at dusk. The sun is going down behind the far islands, turning the sea to soft gold and then to deep purple. Fishing boats are being pulled up onto the sand for the night. Somewhere, a fire is lit, and the smell of wood smoke drifts along the beach. The first stars appear. The waves fold over, one after another, slow and endless, and the whole warm land settles down towards sleep. This is where our story begins. Rest here a while, on the quiet shore, and let us go back even further, to the very first people who built palaces by this sea. Chapter 2. The Palace of Knossos. Long before the Greeks you may have heard of, before Athens and Sparta, before the temples on the hills, there lived a gentle and clever people on the great island of Crete. We call them the Minoans, after a legendary king named Minos, though we do not truly know what they called themselves. They lived nearly 4,000 years ago, and they built the first great civilization of Europe. Their heart was a vast palace called Knossos. Picture it in the warm afternoon light. Not a fortress, not a place of war, but a sprawling, sunlit maze of rooms and courtyards and staircases, painted in soft reds and blues and greens. There were storerooms filled with enormous jars of olive oil and grain. There were workshops where craftsmen shaped gold and ivory. There were bright wall paintings of dolphins leaping through water, of lilies swaying, of graceful people in flowing clothes. Cool breezes moved through open courtyards. Light wells carried the sun down into the lower floors. The Minoans were traders and sailors. Their ships crossed the whole eastern Mediterranean, carrying beautiful pottery and fine cloth. They seem to have lived, for a long time, in remarkable peace. Their towns had no great walls, for the sea itself was their wall, and their fleet their protection. They loved festivals and dancing, and a strange and daring game in which young people would leap over the horns of a charging bull, turning and tumbling in the air. We see them still, painted on the palace walls, forever caught in mid-leap, forever young. And then, slowly, their world faded. There were earthquakes, for Crete sits on a restless earth. Far to the north, a great volcano on the island of Thera erupted with terrible force, darkening the skies and sending waves across the sea. New people arrived from the mainland, and in time the bright palaces of Crete fell quiet, and the painted halls were empty, and grass grew over the courtyards where the dancers had leapt. But their story did not truly end. It passed, like a torch handed on in the dark to the people of the mainland, a harder, prouder people who would remember Crete in their legends for 1,000 years. Chapter 3. The Golden Kings of Mycenae. On the Greek mainland, among the dry hills, rose fortresses of enormous stone. These were the strongholds of the people we call the Mycenaeans, after their greatest citadel, Mycenae. Where the Minoans had been gentle traders, the Mycenaeans were warriors and kings. They built their walls from blocks so huge that later Greeks could not believe human hands had lifted them, and said they must have been raised by giants. Picture the citadel of Mycenae in its golden age, more than 3,000 years ago. A great gateway, crowned with 2 carved lions, guards the entrance. Inside, on the height of the hill, stands the palace of the king, its central hall warmed by a round hearth, its walls painted with scenes of the hunt and of battle. The king sits among his warriors and his gold, and there was a great deal of gold. In their graves, the Mycenaean lords were buried with golden masks laid over their faces, with swords and cups and jewelry, so that even in death they shone. These were the people the later Greeks remembered as their heroes. It was to this age that they set their greatest legends. The tale of a war fought across the sea against the distant city of Troy over a stolen queen. The long, wandering voyage home of the clever king Odysseus, blown from island to island for 10 long years. Whether these things truly happened in the way the poets sang, no one can say. But somewhere behind the legends lie these real golden kings in their high stone fortresses above the sea. And then their world too came to an end. Across the whole eastern Mediterranean, around 3,000 years ago, a great darkness fell. Cities burned. Trade broke apart. The palaces were abandoned. Even the art of writing was forgotten. We do not fully understand why. Perhaps drought, perhaps famine, perhaps waves of raiders from the sea, perhaps all of these at once. The Greeks fell into what we now call a dark age, poorer and simpler, their great deeds remembered only in songs passed from voice to voice around the fire. For centuries, the light was low, but the songs kept the memory warm, and out of that long quiet, slowly, a new Greece would be born. Chapter 4. The Poet in the Dark. In those long, dim centuries, when the palaces were ruins and few could read or write, the Greeks kept their history alive in the only way they could, by singing it. In every village, in every hall, there were poets, wandering singers who could hold thousands of lines in their memory and pour them out by the fire, night after night, to the soft plucking of a lyre. Imagine such an evening. A simple hall, a low fire, the smell of roasting meat and wood smoke. The work of the day is done. People gather in from the cold, wrapping themselves in wool, settling onto benches along the walls. And an old blind poet takes his place near the hearth. He rests the lyre against his knee, plays a few soft notes, and begins to sing. Of heroes long dead, of the anger of great warriors, of gods who walk among men, of the long road home across the wine-dark sea. Out of this tradition, at the very end of the Dark Age, came 2 great poems, gathered and shaped, so the Greeks believed, by a poet named Homer. One told of the war at Troy, the other of the long voyage home. These poems became, for every Greek who came after, a kind of shared treasure, learned by heart, quoted, loved, the common memory of an entire people. Children grew up on them, old men wept at them. They taught the Greeks who they were. And around the same time, the Greeks did something quiet but enormous. They borrowed an alphabet from their trading partners across the sea, the Phoenicians, and they improved it, adding letters for the vowel sounds. For the first time, the songs could be written down. The long silence of the Dark Age was ending. The Greeks could write again, and now they would begin to write not only poems, but laws and histories, and the first stirrings of philosophy. A new dawn was coming. But that is for later. For now, let the poet sing you gently towards sleep, his voice rising and falling by the fire as the stars turn slowly overhead. Chapter 5. The Rise of the City. As the Dark Age lifted, the Greeks began to gather themselves into a new kind of home. Not a kingdom, not an empire, but something smaller and more intimate, which they called the polis, the city-state. Hundreds of them grew up across Greece and its islands, each one a little world of its own, a town, the farmland around it, and usually a high rocky hill in the center, the Acropolis, where the people could shelter and where they built the temples of their gods. Picture a typical Greek city waking in the early morning. The sky pales over the eastern hills. Roosters call. Farmers walk out through the gates to their fields of barley and their rows of olive trees and their vines heavy with grapes. In the town, shutters open, bread bakes. Potters and smiths and weavers begin their work. And in the open square at the heart of the city, the agora, people begin to gather, to buy and sell, to argue and gossip and share the news. Each city was fiercely proud, fiercely independent, and often quarreling with its neighbors. But the Greeks knew, all the same, that they were one people. They spoke the same language. They sang the same poems of Homer. They worshipped the same gods. And every 4 years, they set aside their quarrels and came together in peace at a sacred place called Olympia to hold games in honor of Zeus, the king of the gods, running and wrestling and racing chariots. For the days of the games, war itself was forbidden, and from all over the Greek world, athletes and crowds streamed toward Olympia under the summer sun. 2 cities, in time, would grow greater and more famous than all the rest, and they were almost perfect opposites. One looked inward, hard and disciplined, a city of soldiers. The other looked outward, restless and brilliant, a city of thinkers and artists and sailors. Their names were Sparta and Athens. And to understand the great age that was coming, we must come to know them both, but gently. There is no hurry. Let us rest first and take them one at a time, beginning with the stern grey city in the south. Chapter 6. Sparta, the city of iron. Deep in a broad valley in the southern part of Greece, ringed by tall mountains, lay the city of Sparta. It had no great walls, and it built no grand temples of marble, and it left behind almost no beautiful things. And yet for centuries it was the most feared city in all of Greece, because Sparta was not truly a city at all in the ordinary sense. Sparta was an army that happened to have a home. The Spartans had made a choice, long before, that shaped everything about them. Every Spartan man was to be a soldier, and only a soldier, for his whole life. The work of the fields was done for them by a vast population of conquered people, so that the Spartans themselves could give all their time to training for war. From boyhood, they were raised to be tough, silent, and brave. They lived simply, ate plain food at shared tables, and prized above all things courage, discipline, and loyalty to their city. Picture a Spartan column on the march. Rank upon rank of warriors in bronze, their round shields locked together, their long spears bristling, moving as one body, calm and terrible and slow. In battle they did not break, and they did not run. Other Greeks trained for war when they had to. The Spartans trained for nothing else. It was said that a Spartan mother, sending her son to battle, would hand him his heavy shield and tell him to come back carrying it, as a victor, or carried upon it, as an honored dead. They did not fear death. They feared only shame. There was something magnificent in the Spartans, and something cold. They gave up almost everything that made life sweet: art, comfort, ease, even much of family life, for the sake of strength and honor. They are remembered, above all, for a single desperate stand at a narrow mountain pass, where a small band of them held back a vast invading army so that the rest of Greece might have time to prepare. But we will come to that. For now, let the grey city sleep in its quiet valley, its soldiers resting under the stars, and let us cross the mountains to the north and east, to a very different kind of place. A city that would give the world not soldiers, but ideas. Chapter 7. Athens and the birth of democracy. Athens sat on a wide plain near the sea, gathered around a great flat-topped rock that rose out of the middle of the city, the Acropolis, the high place, crowned with the temples of the goddess Athena, for whom the city was named. Where Sparta was closed and hard, Athens was open and curious, a city of merchants and sailors and craftsmen, of poets and talkers and restless, questioning minds. And in Athens, slowly and painfully, over many years, the people did something that had almost never been done before in all of human history. They gave the power to rule to themselves. Not to a king, not to a small circle of the rich, but to the whole body of citizens, gathered together to decide their own affairs. They called it democracy, from their words for the people and for power, the power of the people. Picture the Athenians gathering, thousands of them, on a bare hillside in the morning light to hold their assembly. Any citizen might stand up and speak. Any citizen might argue for peace or for war, for this law or that one. They voted by a show of hands, and the majority decided, and what they decided became the will of the city. Officials were often chosen by lot, like drawing straws, so that ordinary men, not only the powerful, would take their turn at running the city. It was far from perfect. Women had no vote, and the city rested on the labor of many who were not free. And yet, it was an astonishing thing, a bold and hopeful experiment, that ordinary people, reasoning together, could govern themselves. This spirit, open, argumentative, endlessly curious, would make Athens for one brilliant century the beating heart of the Greek world. Here, men would build temples of dazzling beauty, write plays still performed today, and ask the deep questions about truth and goodness that we are still asking now. But that golden age was born, as golden ages often are, out of a moment of terrible danger, when a vast empire from the east turned its eyes westward and threatened to swallow the little quarreling cities of Greece whole. To that great struggle we now, gently, turn. Chapter 8. The Great War with Persia. Far to the east lay the greatest empire the world had yet seen, the Empire of Persia, stretching from the edge of India all the way to the shores of the sea, ruled by a king so mighty that he was called simply the Great King. To the Persians, the little cities of Greece were a small and troublesome place at the far western edge of the world, and when those cities defied him, the great king resolved to bring them under his rule. Twice the vast power of Persia came against Greece. The first time, a Persian army landed on a plain called Marathon, not far from Athens. The Athenians, badly outnumbered, marched out to meet them, and, astonishingly, won. It is said that a runner carried the news of the victory all the way back to Athens without stopping, gasped out the word that they had won, and fell dead from the effort. From that long run, we still take the name of the race we call the Marathon. The second time was far more terrible. A new great king gathered an army so enormous that the Greeks said it drank the rivers dry as it passed. He bridged the very sea with boats lashed together and poured his host into Greece. And here came Sparta's great and tragic hour. At a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, a tiny force of Greeks, led by a Spartan king and his royal guard of 300, held the pass against the whole Persian army for days, so that the rest of Greece might ready itself. In the end, they were surrounded and killed, every one, fighting to the last. But their sacrifice bought the time that was needed, for then the Greeks turned to the sea. In the narrow waters near an island called Salamis, the swift Greek ships, lighter and cleverer, trapped the great Persian fleet in the strait and shattered it, while the great king watched from a throne set up on the shore. The following year, the Persian army on land was broken as well. Against all the odds, the little free cities of Greece had thrown back the greatest empire on earth. And the city that had led at sea, that had dared and risked the most, now rose to the height of its glory. Athens, in the morning of its golden age. Chapter 9. The Golden Age of Athens. The years that followed the defeat of Persia were, for Athens, a springtime of the mind unlike anything the world had known. The city was proud, wealthy, and free, and into it poured artists and thinkers and dreamers from all over the Greek world. At the center of this age stood a single, wise, and eloquent leader named Pericles, who guided the city for a generation and gave the age his name. Under Pericles, the Athenians decided to rebuild the temples on their Acropolis, which the Persians had burned, and to make them more beautiful than anything before. Picture the great rock rising above the city, and upon it, gleaming in the sun, a temple of white marble, the Parthenon, the house of the goddess Athena. Its columns rose in perfect proportion, so subtly shaped that the eye reads them as flawless. Within stood a towering statue of the goddess, bright with gold and ivory. Even in ruin, 2,500 years later, the Parthenon still stands upon its hill and still takes the breath away. But the Golden Age was not only stone. In the open-air theatres cut into the hillsides, the Athenians gathered in their thousands to watch plays, great tragedies that made them weep for the suffering of kings and heroes, and wild comedies that made them roar with laughter at the follies of their own leaders. These plays asked hard and lasting questions about fate and justice and pride, and what we owe to the gods and to one another. And they are with us still. We perform them to this day. It was an age of confidence, of beauty, of the sense that human beings, thinking and creating together, could reach almost anything. And yet, like the Athenians standing proud upon their bright Acropolis, we cannot see what is coming. For the very strength of Athens, its wealth and its power, had begun to frighten the other Greeks, and above all, to frighten stern and watchful Sparta. The two greatest cities of Greece, so utterly unlike, were drifting toward a long and ruinous war with one another. But before we follow them into that sad struggle, let us pause in the golden light a little longer and walk for a while among the thinkers, for this same city, in these same years, gave birth to something that would outlast every temple and every empire. Philosophy. Chapter 10. The Philosophers. In the busy squares and shaded colonnades of Athens, there walked a strange and wonderful kind of person. Men who did nothing all day but think and talk and ask questions. The Greeks had begun to wonder, more deeply than anyone before them, about the world and about themselves. What is everything made of? How should we live? What is justice? What is goodness? What can we truly know? They called the love of such questions philosophy, the love of wisdom. The most famous of them was a curious, ugly, barefoot old man named Socrates. He wrote nothing down. Instead, he wandered the city, stopping people in the street, generals, politicians, proud young men, and asking them gentle, simple questions. What is courage? What is justice? And question by question, so kindly that they hardly noticed, he would show them that they did not truly know the answers they thought they knew. He said that he himself was wise in only one thing, that he alone knew how little he knew. In the end, his questions made powerful enemies, and the city put him on trial and condemned him to death. He drank the cup of poison calmly among his weeping friends, still talking gently of the soul, and so became forever the very image of the thinker who would rather die than stop seeking the truth. His pupil Plato carried the search onward, writing deep and beautiful dialogues, dreaming of a perfect and just society, and imagining a world of pure and eternal truths lying behind the shifting things we see. And Plato's own pupil, Aristotle, cast his mind over the whole of the world, studying animals and plants and stars, logic and poetry and government, gathering and ordering knowledge as no one ever had before. For 2,000 years afterward, thinkers across the world would build upon what these three began, here, in the streets of a single small Greek city. This is perhaps the truest treasure that Greece has left us. Empires rise and fall, marble crumbles, but the questions the Greeks first dared to ask, and the freedom of mind with which they asked them, live on in every school and every library and every quiet, wondering thought. Rest now on that gentle idea that somewhere, long ago, by this warm sea, people first learned to wonder freely, and let us return, softly, and with some sorrow, to the story of the cities, and to the long war that would bring the Golden Age to its close. Chapter 11. The long war between the cities. It began, as such things do, slowly, and then all at once. Athens, mighty at sea, had gathered many other Greek cities into a great alliance, and slowly that alliance had become something like an empire, with Athens at its head. Sparta, mighty on land, and its own allies, watched this growing power with deepening fear and distrust. And at last, the long-feared war broke out between them, a war that would drag on, with pauses and truces, for nearly 30 years, and draw in almost the whole Greek world. It was a strange and cruel war of opposites. Sparta's army was unbeatable on land, but could not touch Athens behind her long walls or upon the sea. Athens' navy ruled the waves, but her soldiers could not stand against the Spartans in open battle. And so the war dragged on and on, each city strong where the other was weak, neither able to land the final blow. The Athenians pulled their people inside the walls and let the Spartans burn the fields outside. And then, packed together in the crowded city, they were struck by a terrible plague that swept away a great part of the population and carried off the wise Pericles himself. The longer the war went on, the harder and crueler it became. Cities that had once competed in games and poetry now besieged and slaughtered one another. Great gambles were taken. A huge Athenian fleet and army sailed far away to attack the rich island of Sicily, and there, far from home, it was utterly destroyed, tens of thousands lost. Slowly, painfully, the strength of Athens was bleeding away. And in the end, with help from the very Persians they had once thrown back, the Spartans built a fleet, defeated the Athenian navy at last, and starved the great city into surrender. The long walls of Athens were pulled down to the sound of flutes, and the golden age was over. Sparta had won, but her victory turned to ashes. She was not made to rule an empire, and soon other cities rose against her, and the endless quarreling of the Greeks went on, city against city, year after year, all of them exhausted, all of them weakened. And while the Greeks wore themselves out in their old rivalries, they did not notice a new power quietly growing strong on their northern border. A rough, half-wild kingdom of hardy mountaineers, ruled by a clever and ambitious king. That kingdom was called Macedon, and out of it would come a young man who would change the whole world. Chapter 12. Alexander. His father, King Philip of Macedon, was a brilliant and ruthless man who forged the finest army Greece had ever seen, and, one by one, brought the tired old Greek cities under his control. But it is the son the world remembers. His name was Alexander, and he had been taught as a boy by the philosopher Aristotle himself. He carried with him always, it was said, a copy of Homer's poems, and dreamed of the heroes of old. When his father was murdered, Alexander became king while still a very young man, and he looked east toward the vast and ancient empire of Persia and resolved to conquer it all. What followed is almost beyond belief. With his hardened army, Alexander crossed into Asia and, in a series of great battles, shattered the enormous forces of the Persian great king, though he was always outnumbered, sometimes many times over. City after city, land after land, fell before him. He marched into Egypt, where he was hailed as a god, and founded a new city by the sea that still bears his name, Alexandria. He took the heart of the Persian Empire, its treasure and its palaces, and still he did not stop. On and on he pushed his weary men, over mountains and deserts, through unknown lands, all the way to the far rivers of India. At the edge of the world the Greeks knew. There at last his soldiers would go no further. They had marched for years. They were tired beyond telling. They longed for home. And so, reluctantly, Alexander turned back. But on the journey home, in the ancient city of Babylon, still a young man, not yet 33 years old, he fell ill with a fever, and after a few days he died. He had conquered more of the world than anyone before him, and he had not been beaten in a single battle. When his companions asked him, at the end, to whom he left his vast empire, he is said to have answered only, "To the strongest." Chapter 13. The wider world. There was no single strongest, and so Alexander's enormous empire, held together only by his own genius and will, broke apart almost as soon as he was gone. His generals fought over the pieces and carved them into great kingdoms of their own, one in Egypt, one in the old lands of Persia, one in Greece and Macedon. For a long time, these kingdoms warred and traded and flourished, and we call this the age that followed the Hellenistic age, the age when Greek ways spread across the whole known world, for this was Alexander's truest legacy. In his wake, the Greek language, Greek art, Greek learning, and Greek cities spread from Egypt to the borders of India. In the new city of Alexandria, by the mouth of the Nile, the kings built a wonder greater than any temple, a great library, which tried to gather into one place every book in the world, and a museum where scholars from every land studied the stars, and the human body, and the size of the earth itself. Here, a librarian measured the circumference of the whole planet with astonishing accuracy, using only shadows and reason. Here, mathematics and astronomy and medicine reached heights that would not be matched again for many centuries. The little quarreling cities of Greece had grown into something vast, a whole civilization spread across 3 continents, joined by a common language and a common love of beauty and reason. The world had become, in a sense, Greek. And yet, even as Greek culture spread so far and so wide, the political power of the Greeks themselves was quietly fading. For far to the west, across the sea, another city had been growing, patient and disciplined and relentless, a city on 7 hills by a river in Italy. Its name was Rome, and Rome was rising. Chapter 14. The Quiet Twilight. The end came not in a single great battle, but slowly, the way a long day fades into evening. Kingdom by kingdom, the Greek world was drawn into the widening power of Rome. The Romans came sometimes as conquerors, and sometimes as invited friends, and one by one the proud old lands, Macedon, Greece, and at last, generations later, the rich kingdom of Egypt with its final queen, Cleopatra, passed under Roman rule. The age of Greek freedom was over, and yet, and this is the gentlest turn in the whole long story, the Greeks were conquered, but their spirit was not. For the Romans, who had beaten them in war, fell utterly in love with them in peace. Roman children were taught by Greek tutors. Roman poets modeled themselves on Greek poets. Roman temples rose in the Greek style. Roman philosophers followed Greek schools. Wealthy Romans sent their sons to study in Athens as if on a pilgrimage. There is an old line from a Roman poet that captures it perfectly. "Captive Greece," he wrote, "took captive her fierce conqueror." Greece lost her armies and her kings, and quietly conquered the mind of Rome instead. And through Rome, and through all the centuries since, the gifts of Greece flowed onto us. Our words democracy and philosophy, physics and music and theatre are Greek words. The plays first performed on those hillsides are still performed. The questions Socrates first asked are still asked. The shape of the Parthenon echoes in banks and libraries and parliaments all over the world. When we vote, when we reason, when we sit in a theatre in the dark, when we look up at the stars and wonder what they are, we are, in a quiet way, the children of that small, bright, quarrelsome people who lived long ago beside the wine-dark sea. So the story does not really end. It only softens and settles and passes on, the way the daylight passes into evening and the evening into night. The great cities are quiet now. The temples stand empty on their sunlit hills, and the swallows nest in the marble, and the olive trees still turn silver in the wind just as they did 4,000 years ago. And the same warm sea that carried the first ships still rises and falls along the same pale shores, slowly, endlessly, rising and falling, like breathing, like sleep. Let it carry you now. Let your body grow heavy and warm. Let every thought of the day set itself down, gently, the way a boat is drawn up onto the sand at nightfall. There is nothing more to do and nowhere more to be. The long story is told. The stars are turning over the quiet islands, and the wine-dark sea folds over and over and over and over, carrying you softly down into sleep. Sleep well, and I will see you next time, here, in the velvet past.